I lost count of how many April plantings I completely wasted before my father finally sat me down and said, "Son, you're fighting the calendar instead of working with it." That one conversation saved me years of frustration, and it is exactly why I put together these 15 crops you need to get in the ground this month. Every single one of these is time sensitive. Miss the window and you are either waiting until next year or settling for a fraction of what your harvest could have been. Now, I've arranged these in a specific order for a reason, and the last crop on this list is the one that genuinely changed how I plan my entire growing season after about a decade of doing it wrong. I'm also going to share a bonus technique after we get through all 15, something I stumbled onto about 3 years ago that has to do with how you water these April transplants, and it is so simple, you will wonder why nobody talks about it. So let us get right into it because April does not wait for anybody. Here's the thing most people overlook about April planting. It is not just about frost dates, it is about soil temperature. Your air might feel like spring, but if your soil is still sitting at 45 degrees 2 inches down, half of what you plant is just going to sulk there and do nothing. I spent years blaming bad seeds and lousy luck when the real problem was I did not own a soil thermometer. A $4 tool from the hardware store would have saved me entire seasons of disappointment. Once I started checking soil temps before every planting, everything clicked. That is the principle behind every crop on this list, matching what you plant to what the ground is actually ready for, not what the weather app says the air feels like. So the first crop you absolutely must get in the ground this April is potatoes. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but here is why I am putting it first. Potatoes are one of the most forgiving crops you can plant, and they actually prefer a cool soil. You want your ground at about 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which in most of zones 4 through 8, that is early to mid-April. My father used to say, "When the dandelions bloom, plant your potatoes." That man never owned a soil thermometer in his life, but he was right. Cut your seed potatoes so each piece has at least 2 eyes, let the cuts dry for a day or two so they callus over, and plant them about 4 inches deep and 12 inches apart. I made the mistake my first year of planting whole potatoes because I thought cutting them was wasteful. I got half the yield of my neighbor who planted the same variety. Lesson learned. If you want a reliable producer, Yukon Gold and Kennebec are 2 varieties that have never let me down. And the beautiful thing about potatoes is they set the stage perfectly for what comes next. Peas are your second must plant. And honestly, if you have not gotten peas in the ground by mid-April, you are already behind. Peas are a cool season crop that actually stops producing once temperatures consistently hit 80 degrees. So every day you delay in April is a day you lose on the back end. Direct sow them about 1 inch deep and 2 inches apart. I like to run them along a simple string trellis, nothing fancy, just some twine between 2 stakes about 5 feet tall. The variety I keep coming back to is Sugar Snap, the old burpee standard. It is prolific, it is sweet right off the vine, and it handles a light frost without flinching. And one thing I wish someone had told me early on is to inoculate your pea seeds with rhizobium bacteria before planting. You can buy a little packet of inoculant for a couple dollars, you dampen the seeds and roll them in it, and those bacteria fix nitrogen right there in the soil. Your peas grow better, and your soil gets a free fertility boost for whatever you plant there next. I skipped this step for years because I thought it was unnecessary marketing, and I was flat wrong. This next one pairs perfectly with peas because it is another cool weather lover that simply will not perform if you wait until May. I am talking about lettuce. And not just any lettuce, I mean getting a full succession going right now. I plant a short row of lettuce every 10 to 14 days starting in early April, and that gives me fresh salad greens for 2 solid months before the heat shuts things down. Plant your seeds a 1/4 inch deep, about 4 inches apart for leaf types and 8 to 10 inches for head types. Buttercrunch is my go-to head lettuce because it handles a little heat better than most before bolting. For leaf lettuce, red sales has been a performer in my garden for years. Now here's a specific tip that took me a while to figure out. If your lettuce seeds are not germinating, your soil might actually be too warm. Lettuce germinates best between 55 and 65 degrees. And if the soil is above 75, germination drops off a cliff. I had a whole flat fail on me one year and blamed the seeds until I actually checked the temperature. The seeds were fine. I was the problem. Now, if you're getting value out of this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I put out straightforward gardening advice every week. No gimmicks, no sales pitches, just what actually works in the garden. All right, let us keep moving because we still have some real important ones ahead. The next crop might surprise some folks, but April is prime time for getting onion sets and transplants in the ground. Onions need a long growing season and they are triggered to bulb up by day length, not temperature. So if you wait too long to plant, they simply do not have enough time to develop full-size bulbs before the long days of summer flip that switch. In zones 5 through 7, early to mid-April is your window. Plant sets about 1 inch deep and 4 to 6 inches apart. If you're using transplants, which I honestly prefer because they give you bigger bulbs, space them 6 inches apart and just barely cover the roots. I grow mostly yellow onions, and copra has been the most reliable storage onion I've found. It keeps in my garage clear through February most years. The mistake I made for the longest time was planting onions too deep. You want about the top third of the set sticking above the soil line. Bury them too deep, and you end up with thick necks that do not cure well and rot in storage. Ask me how I know. Now this one takes us in a slightly different direction, and it is something I neglected for far too long. Beets. April is perfect for beets because they germinate in soil as cool as 50 degrees, and they actually develop better flavor when they mature in cool weather. What I did not realize for years is that each beet seed is actually a cluster of seeds, so you're going to get multiple seedlings from each one. Plant them about 1 inch deep and 1 inch apart, then thin to 3 to 4 inches once they are up. I grow Detroit Dark Red because my father grew it, his father grew it, and it just works. But here's where it gets interesting. Those thinnings you pull out are not waste. They are some of the best salad greens you will ever eat. Tender, earthy, gorgeous color. I used to throw them on the compost pile, which is about the most wasteful thing a gardener can do. Now they go straight to the kitchen. Carrots are next, and this is one where timing and technique really matter. Carrot seeds are tiny, slow to germinate, and fussy about soil conditions. But if you get them in during April, when the soil is around 50 to 60 degrees and consistently moist, you set yourself up for success. The key is soil preparation. Carrots need loose, rock-free soil to at least 12 inches deep, or they fork and twist into weird little shapes that are fun to look at, but annoying to peel. I add a 1/4 inch layer of fine compost right on the surface and plant the seeds just 1/8 of an inch deep. Then I cover them with a strip of burlap or a thin board to hold moisture until they germinate, which can take 14 to 21 days. Patience is the whole game with carrots. Danvers, Half-Long, and Nantes are my 2 standards. The mistake I kept making was letting the soil crust over before the seedlings emerged and then wondering why I had bare patches. Once I started covering the row, my germination went from maybe 40% to well over 80%. This next one is for anyone who wants to eat well out of the garden early and often, and it is one of the fastest crops you can grow. Radishes. I almost did not include radishes because they seem too basic, but honestly, that is exactly why they belong on this list. They go from seed to table in 25 to 30 days. They thrive in cool April soil, and they fill space between slower crops while you wait. Plant them 1/2 inch deep and 1 inch apart, and thin to 2 inches. Cherry Bell is the classic, but if you want something with more flavor and better size, try watermelon radish. Now, watermelon radishes take longer, about 50 to 60 days, So plant those early in April for a late May harvest. I tuck radishes between my carrot rows and my lettuce beds, and by the time those slower crops need the space, the radishes are already on my plate. No wasted ground, no wasted time. Here is one a lot of gardeners sleep on in April, and it is spinach. Real spinach, not the baby stuff you buy in plastic containers. Spinach is incredibly cold, hardy, and actually performs best when it goes in early. Soil at 40 degrees will work, though 50 is better. Plant seeds 1/2 inch deep and 3 inches apart. I direct sow mine, and I do not bother with indoor starts because spinach does not transplant well. It tends to bolt. The variety Bloomsdale Longstanding has been in my garden every spring for at least 15 years, and it earns its place every single time. The name tells you what it does. It stands longer before bolting than most varieties, which gives you extra harvest weeks. I made the mistake one year of waiting until late April to plant spinach, and it went straight to seed within 3 weeks. Never again. Now let us talk about something that bridges the gap between the cool season crops and the warm season crops, and that is Swiss chard. I love chard because it handles the cold, it handles the heat, and it just keeps producing. You can plant it in April when soil temps hit 50 degrees, and it will still be giving you leaves in October. Plant seeds about 1 inch deep and 6 inches apart. Bright Lights is the variety that gives you those gorgeous multicolored stems, but for pure production, Ford Hook Giant is hard to beat. I treat chard like a cut and come again crop. I harvest the outer leaves and let the center keep growing. One planting gives me 5, sometimes 6 months of greens. I honestly cannot think of a better return on investment in the vegetable garden, and I say that as a man who does not throw that phrase around lightly. We're getting into the territory now where things shift a bit, and this next crop is one that rewards you for thinking ahead in April, even though you will not harvest it until much later. I'm talking about broccoli transplants. You should have started broccoli indoors about 6 to 8 weeks ago. And if you did, now is when those transplants go out. If you did not start your own, buy transplants from a local nursery. No shame in that at all. I buy transplants plenty of times, plant them 18 to 24 inches apart because they need room, and set them a little deeper than they were in the pot, right up to the first set of true leaves. Waltham 29 is an heirloom variety that has been reliable for me, but if you want side shoots after the main head, Green Magic is a hybrid that just keeps producing. The biggest mistake I see with broccoli is people waiting too long to plant the transplants, and then the weather gets warm before heads form. Broccoli wants to mature in cool conditions. If it feels summer heat before the head is tight, it bolts. That is a crop you cannot get back. This next one is closely related and follows the same logic. Cabbage. Specifically, early season cabbage transplants need to go out in April in most of the country. Plant them 15 to 18 inches apart and give them consistent water. Early Jersey Wakefield is an heirloom that matures in about 65 days and makes a beautiful pointed head. I grow it every year. Cabbage is not glamorous, I will grant you that, but a single head turned into coleslaw or sauerkraut is worth its weight in gold come summer. The key with April planted cabbage is to get it in early enough that it sizes up before the heat. Once temperatures stay above 80, cabbage just stops growing and starts to crack and split. All right, here's where we shift gears completely. And this is the one that catches a lot of people off guard. April is when you should be starting your warm season transplants indoors if you have not already, and the one I want to specifically call out is tomatoes. Now, I am not telling you to plant tomatoes outside in April unless you are in zone 8 or warmer. What I'm saying is that if you are in zones 5 through 7, April is your window to start tomato seeds indoors under lights 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. And here's the thing, if you miss this window, you are buying transplants in May, and you are paying somebody else's price for somebody else's variety selection. I start mine in a simple seed starting mix, 1/4 inch deep, under a basic shop light hung 2 inches above the tray. The soil needs to stay around 70 to 75 degrees for good germination, and a cheap seedling heat mat makes a world of difference. I resisted buying a heat mat for years because I thought it was an unnecessary expense. $14 later, my germination rate went from about 60% to over 90%. Sometimes being cheap costs you more. This next one follows the same indoor logic, and it is peppers. Peppers actually need even more lead time than tomatoes, so if you have not started them yet, today is the day. They want soil temps of 80 to 85 degrees for optimal germination, which is warmer than most people realize. I use that same heat mat, and I cover the tray with a humidity dome until I see green. Peppers are slow. Expect 7 to 14 days for germination, and do not panic at 10 days. Jalapeno and California Wonder are my two staples. The single biggest mistake I made with peppers for years was starting them too late and then transplanting out leggy, weak seedlings that took forever to establish. Start them in April, give them plenty of light, and when they finally go outside in late May or June, they hit the ground running. But really, the timing principle here is the same as tomatoes. You are not planting outside yet. You are investing time indoors so you are ready when the soil warms. Now, my second to last crop is one I bet most of you already have space for, and it is one that took me way too long to start growing in April. Herbs. Specifically, cold-tolerant herbs like parsley, cilantro, and dill. These are not summer herbs. They actually prefer to establish in cool weather. Direct sow cilantro and dill 1/4 inch deep in April soil. Cilantro bolts fast once it gets hot, so getting it in early gives you the longest harvest window. I plant slow bolt cilantro, and even that variety gives me maybe 6 good weeks before it flowers. But those 6 weeks of fresh cilantro are worth every bit of effort. Parsley, either flat leaf or curly, can go out as transplants or direct sown, and it is a biennial, so it will come back next spring, too. I grow Italian flat-leaf parsley in every bed that has an open corner, and I have never regretted it once. And now we arrive at the last E1. The one I mentioned right at the start, the crop that genuinely changed how I plan my entire April garden. It is kale. I know kale. Hear me out. I avoided kale for years because I thought it was just a trendy superfood that food bloggers pushed on people. My father never grew it, so I never grew it. Then a neighbor gave me a handful of lacinato kale seedlings one April, and I stuck them in a corner of the garden mostly out of politeness. Those plants produce from April all the way through the first hard freeze in November, 7 months from one planting. I'd never had a single crop feed my family for that long from one sowing. Kale actually gets sweeter after frost because the cold converts starches to sugars in the leaves. Plant it out as transplants in April, 12 to 18 inches apart, and just keep harvesting the lower leaves while the plant keeps growing upward. In zones 5 through 7, April planted kale will outproduce almost anything else in your garden on a per square foot basis over the course of a season. That is not a trendy claim. That is simple math based on months of continuous harvest versus a single pick. Once I understood that, I stopped thinking of April as just the start of the season and started thinking of it as the foundation for the whole year. Every April since, kale goes in first week. No exceptions. It changed my garden from something that peaked in July to something that produced nearly year-round. And it took my neighbor handing me a few seedlings to see what I had been missing for a decade. Sometimes the best gardening lessons come from admitting somebody else had a better idea. Now, before I give you that bonus tip I promised, let me run through a few common mistakes I see people make with April planting, because I made every one of these myself. The first is planting everything on the same day. I used to clear out a Saturday, buy everything at the garden center, and shove it all in the ground at once. The problem is, not every crop wants the same soil temperature or the same conditions. Your peas and lettuce are fine in early April, but your broccoli transplants might need another week if you just had a cold snap. Stagger your planting across the month based on what each crop actually needs, not when it is convenient for your schedule. The second mistake is ignoring your last frost date and just going by the calendar. April 15th means something very different in Zone 4 than it does in Zone 7. Check your actual last frost date, count backwards, and plan accordingly. I once lost an entire tray of tomato seedlings because I set them out the first warm week of April, thinking spring had arrived. It had not. The third one is skipping hardening off for transplants. Any seedling you grew indoors needs a week of gradual outdoor exposure before it goes in the ground permanently. I set mine out for 2 hours the first day in a sheltered spot, then increased by an hour or two each day. Skip the step and you get transplant shock, wilting, sunburn on the leaves, and a setback of 2 to 3 weeks. I learned this one the painful way more than once. Now here's that bonus tip I mentioned at the beginning. After you plant your April crops, water them in with lukewarm water, not cold water straight from the hose. I know that sounds like an old wives' tale, but there is actual science behind it. Cold water hitting cool spring soil can drop the root zone temperature by several degrees, which slows root establishment right when you need it most. I started filling a watering can and letting it sit in the sun for an hour before watering in my transplants and direct sown seeds. A study out of Oregon State Extension noted that soil temperature fluctuations at planting time significantly affect root development speed in cool season crops. Since I started doing this, my transplants established noticeably faster, often by 4 to 5 days. That is 4 to 5 days of growing. Instead of 4 to 5 days of sitting there stressed, it costs nothing, takes almost no extra effort, and it works. That is my kind of gardening advice, so if you found this useful, drop a comment below and tell me which of these 15 crops you are putting in first this April. Or if there is something you think I left off the list, I genuinely want to hear about it, because I am still learning too, even after all these years. Share this with a friend who keeps saying they want to start a garden but never does. April is the month to make it happen. Hit subscribe if you want more of this kind of straight talk every week. Those 15 crops represent the foundation of a productive garden, and every single one of them has an April deadline for a reason. Get them in the ground while the window is open, and you will be eating out of your garden when your neighbors are still staring at empty dirt. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next one.